It was supposed to be a routine afternoon in Rio de Janeiro, a city humming with the noise of traffic, street vendors, and the distant pulse of samba drifting from somewhere unseen. June 12, 2000. A Monday, ordinary in every sense, until it wasn't. By the time the sun went down that evening, millions of Brazilians had watched in real time one of the most haunting hostage crises in their country's history. Cameras rolling, anchors narrating, a nation frozen in front of television screens, helpless witnesses to a tragedy unfolding live, and at the center of it all, a young man who the world would come to know only as Sandro. To understand what happened on that bus, you first have to understand the city where it happened. And to understand the city, you have to understand what Brazil was in the year 2000. Rio de Janeiro is one of the most visually stunning places on Earth. Mountains tumbling into the ocean, favelas clinging to hillsides, luxury condominiums overlooking some of the most impoverished neighborhoods in South America, all of it existing side by side, sometimes within the same city block. It is a city of extraordinary contrasts, and those contrasts have consequences. In the 1990s, street children were a visible and troubling reality in Brazilian cities. Thousands of kids, orphaned, abandoned, or simply running from situations at home that were worse than the street, lived in public spaces, sleeping in doorways, under bridges, in parks. Society, for the most part, looked away, and when it didn't look away, it sometimes looked with hostility. That is the world Sandro Barbosa do Nascimento grew up in. Sandro was born on July 7, 1978, in São Gonçalo, a city just across the bay from Rio. His father was never in the picture, gone before Sandro was even born. For the first years of his life, he had his mother, and then, when he was 8 years old, he lost her too. She was stabbed to death, and Sandro watched it happen. That single moment, the image of his mother falling, the helplessness of a child who couldn't stop it, became something that those who later knew him described as the defining wound of his life. After that day, there was no one to go home to. No aunt who could take him in permanently. No institution equipped to handle the trauma of what he'd seen. Sandro ended up on the streets of Rio de Janeiro. He was 8 years old. Life on the streets of Rio in the late 1980s and early 1990s was brutal for children. They formed loose groups for protection, sleeping in clusters in public spaces, scavenging for food, surviving however they could. Sandro fell into that world, and into the drug use and petty crime that came with it. By his teenage years, he had a record: theft, robbery. He moved in and out of juvenile facilities. He never learned to read or write. The institutions that were supposed to help children like him were overcrowded, underfunded, and largely ineffective. He fell through every crack in the system, and the system, it seemed, was mostly cracks. But what happened next to Sandro wasn't just neglect. It was something far darker. On the night of July 23, 1993, a group of young people, most of them teenagers and children, were sleeping on the ground near the Candelaria church in downtown Rio de Janeiro. The Candelaria is one of the city's most iconic landmarks, a massive Baroque cathedral sitting at the end of a wide boulevard in the heart of the city. For the street children who slept there, its grand facade offered modest shelter from the elements. Just before midnight, 2 vehicles, a taxi and a Chevette with covered license plates, pulled up near the church. The occupants opened fire on the sleeping crowd. When it was over, 8 people were dead, most of them teenagers. Several others were wounded. In the chaos and darkness, some managed to run, some survived by pretending to be dead, dozens scattered into the night. Later investigations would reveal that the shooters were connected to militias, armed groups operating in Rio's criminal underworld. The motive, according to investigators, was related to territorial disputes over drug sales in the area around the church. The massacre became known as the Candelaria massacre, and it shocked Brazil and the international community. Amnesty International later documented that, of the roughly 70 people who had been sleeping in that area regularly, 44 would die violently over the years that followed. Sandro was among those sleeping near the Candelaria that night. He survived. What does it do to a person? To a 15-year-old boy, to watch his friends get shot around him in the dark, to survive something that kills the people beside you? Psychologists who later reviewed his case spoke about layers of unprocessed trauma, violence internalized so deeply that it became part of how he understood the world. A boy who had watched his mother die, who had lived on the streets, who had survived a massacre, who had never been given the tools to process any of it. The world had failed Sandro Barbosa do Nascimento at every turn, and Sandro, in turn, had become a danger to the world around him. By his early 20s, he had been convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 3 years and 6 months in prison. He later escaped, or was released under circumstances that remain murky, and became a fugitive. On the morning of June 12, 2000, he was 21 years old, armed, and moving through the streets of Rio de Janeiro with nothing left to lose. The Route 174 bus ran between Central Station and Gavia, cutting through some of Rio's most affluent neighborhoods in the South Zone. It was a busy line, the kind that fills up quickly in the early afternoon with workers, students, and residents going about their day. 2 women boarded the bus that afternoon in the Rocinha neighborhood, one of the largest favelas in Latin America, sitting improbably in the hills between some of Rio's wealthiest districts. Their names were Geisa Firmo Gonçalves and Damiana Nascimento de Souza. They were friends, and they had a simple errand: get to the Jardim Botanico neighborhood to cash a check for 130 reais. Geisa was 21 years old. She had grown up in Fortaleza, in the northeastern state of Ceará, and had moved to Rio de Janeiro after her mother passed away from cancer, searching for better opportunities. She had found them. She was working as a teacher, building a life in the city. She had a husband, and she was 2 months pregnant. Though the pregnancy was still a private joy, not yet shared widely, she had her whole life ahead of her. At approximately 2:20 in the afternoon, a young man in a t-shirt and shorts stepped onto the bus. He hopped the turnstile. In his hand, or tucked nearby, visible enough to cause instant dread, was a .38 caliber revolver. His name was Sandro, and he was about to turn an ordinary Monday into something Brazil would never forget. For the first 20 minutes or so after Sandro boarded, the bus kept moving. It's unclear exactly what he intended, whether it began as a robbery that spun out of control, or whether he had arrived with a different plan already in mind. What is known is that a passenger noticed the weapon and managed to signal to a passing police patrol car. The police pursued the bus. It was intercepted and forced to stop in the Jardim Botanico neighborhood, directly in front of the military club, a wide, open stretch of road that would soon become a stage. In the confusion of the stop, the driver managed to get out. The fare collector followed. Some passengers scrambled through windows and the rear door, but not everyone made it. Roughly 10 passengers remained trapped inside with Sandro, and almost all of them were women. Within minutes, the first police units had surrounded the bus. Within a little longer than that, the cameras arrived. A television crew happened to spot a convoy from the BOPE, the Batalhão de Operações Policiais Especiais, Rio's elite tactical police unit, and decided to follow it. What they found was a scene that no news producer could walk away from. A city bus, surrounded by police, with a gunman visible through the windows holding hostages. They went live. And then every other major network went live too. What followed was nearly 5 hours of television that gripped Brazil in a way nothing had before. Sandro was, in some ways, a performer. He knew the cameras were there. He used them. He moved to the windows, made eye contact with the lenses pointed at him, shouted things toward the press line. At one point, a police officer offered him a cap from the military police. He put it on backward, almost jauntily, as if playing a role. But beneath the performance was something deeply unstable. He fired a shot at the windshield of the bus, a warning, an act of dominance, a message to the photographers clustered outside to back away. He forced one of the female passengers to drive the bus, or try to. He called on a male passenger, a young man named William Nunes de Moura, a college student who attempted to start the engine and couldn't. Sandro, apparently satisfied that the bus wasn't going anywhere, let William go, telling him he didn't want to make him late for class. It was a strange moment of almost mundane humanity in the middle of something terrifying. He forced one of the remaining female passengers, a young woman named Janaína Neves, to write messages on the interior of the bus windows using lipstick. The messages were visible from outside, readable through the glass. He's going to kill everyone at 6 o'clock. He has a pact with the devil. The police negotiators positioned outside were working with limited information. They didn't even know Sandro's real name at first. They called him Sergio, a guess that turned out to be wrong. His identity was not confirmed until later. One woman who had been suffering from health problems, Damiana, Geisa's friend, who had previously survived 2 strokes, began to deteriorate inside the bus. Sandro, in a moment that observers found surprising, allowed her to be released. She walked off the bus and collapsed almost immediately, suffering what would later be confirmed as a third stroke. She survived, but the damage was permanent. She lost her ability to speak clearly and movement on her left side. As the afternoon stretched into early evening, the negotiations stalled. Sandro's demands, 2 grenades, 2 pistols, a car and 1,000 reis in cash, were, according to police, impossible to fulfill. Whether the negotiators ever seriously engaged with those demands or simply waited, hoping something would break in their favor, remains a point of criticism. At one point, the tension reached what seemed like a peak. Sandro put Janaína on the floor of the bus, pointed the gun at her and told her, and the watching world, that he was going to count to 100 and then pull the trigger. He counted, skipping numbers, dragging it out. When he reached the end, he told her to lie still and pretend she was dead. He fired a shot, into the floor or into the air, the exact accounts vary, and then announced to the police outside, "One is already dead, another one is coming." Outside, watching through cameras and scopes, the police and press believed for a moment that a hostage had been executed, but no invasion order was given. No sniper took a shot. The bus remained where it was. Hours passed. The sun went down. At approximately 6:50 in the evening, nearly 5 hours after the crisis began, something shifted. Without warning, without signal, Sandro decided it was time to leave. He grabbed Geisa Firmo Gonçalves, pressed her in front of him, and stepped down off the bus. She was his shield, her body between him and the rifles pointed in their direction. What happened next took only seconds, and it has been analyzed and debated ever since. A BOP officer, positioned close to the bus door, made the decision to act. He fired. The shot hit Geisa, a grazing wound to her jaw, but a wound nonetheless. A shot that was meant for Sandro had struck the woman he was using as a human shield. The impact startled Sandro. He pulled Geisa tighter, and then he fired. 3 shots at close range into her back. Geisa Firmo Gonçalves, teacher, wife, 21 years old, 2 months pregnant, died at the scene. Sandro was immediately tackled by officers and pulled toward a police vehicle. Cameras captured him being pushed inside. Alive, no visible injuries, several officers crowding in around him. He never came out. The official version, issued by the military police, was that Sandro died of asphyxiation during restraint. He had been, they said, violently resisting, biting officers, allegedly breaking an officer's arm, attempting to grab a weapon. The physical force required to subdue him had, they said, accidentally resulted in his death. Early reports had stated he was shot. That version was quickly walked back. The medical examiner confirmed asphyxia as the cause of death. Years later, the officers involved in Sandro's death were brought to trial. They were acquitted. The fact that cameras had captured him entering the vehicle uninjured meant that the story of an accidental death during restraint could not simply be accepted without scrutiny. But scrutiny in this case did not produce a different legal outcome. Geisa was flown home to Fortaleza. Her funeral was attended by more than 3,000 people, a city mourning a woman most of them had never met, but whose face they had watched for hours on television, trapped behind glass, afraid, waiting for a rescue that came too late and in the wrong way. Her family filed a lawsuit against the state of Rio de Janeiro, arguing that the police's handling of the situation had directly resulted in her death. A court agreed, at least in part, ordering the state to pay compensation and a lifetime pension to her family. As of the mid-2010s, according to reports at the time, payments had still not been fully fulfilled. Sandro was buried 2 days after his death, on June 14, 2000, in a shallow grave at the Caju Cemetery in Rio. His burial was attended by one person, his aunt, the woman who had tried, within the limits of her own difficult circumstances, to be a family to him. He was buried as an indigent. No marker, no ceremony. The Route 174 bus line was eventually renumbered, first to 158, then to 143, and later again, as if changing the number could change what it carried. In the years after June 12, 2000, the case became something more than a crime story. It became a lens through which Brazil examined itself. Journalists, academics, and filmmakers turned to the Onibus 174 case as a way to ask hard questions. What does a society owe to its most vulnerable children? What happens when the systems designed to protect people, foster care, juvenile justice, mental health services, are so broken that they produce the very outcomes they were meant to prevent? Director José Padilla released a documentary simply titled Ônibus 174 in 2002. It is considered one of the most important Brazilian films of the 2000s, and it does something unusual for a film about a crime. It insists that you understand the criminal, not excuse him, understand him. Follow the trail of failures and traumas and abandoned children that led step by step to a man with a gun on a city bus. In 2008, director Bruno Barreto released Last Stop 174, a dramatic feature that filled in the gaps and fictionalized elements of Sandro's story. The case also prompted serious conversations about police tactics in hostage situations. When a nearly identical scenario unfolded 19 years later, in 2019, a gunman took hostages on a bridge connecting Rio to Niterói. The outcome was completely different. A trained sniper neutralized the suspect with a single shot. No hostages were harmed. The contrast was stark and deliberate. Authorities pointed to lessons learned, protocols updated, training improved, all traceable in part to what went wrong on that afternoon in June 2000. There is one more thing worth sitting with before we close. In June 2025, 25 years after the event, 3 survivors of the Bus 174 hostage crisis returned to the location on Rua Jardim Botânico. They stood there together in front of the place where the bus had stopped and held a small ceremony. 25 years, long enough for the city to have changed around the memory, long enough for the debates to have faded from daily conversation into something quieter, historical, academic, archived. And yet they came back, because some things don't let you leave them behind. Geisa Firmo Gonçalves deserved to grow old, to raise her child, to keep teaching. Sandro Barbosa do Nascimento was, in every meaningful sense, failed by the world before he ever failed it. That is not a defense of what he did. It is a reckoning with what we allow to happen to children, and what it costs us when we look away. The cameras were on, Brazil was watching, and a young woman died anyway. That is the story of Bus 174. If this story made you think, if it stayed with you, consider subscribing. Every case we cover gets this kind of depth, this kind of care. And drop a comment below. What do you think should have been done differently that day? I read every single one.